We now welcome Noah Silverman, Congressional Affairs Director for the Republican Jewish Coalition, to the microphone.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for sharing the platform with me, Hallie. It was great to hear your remarks. It's, of course, the case that coming off the recent elections, Haley's side of the political divide had more to celebrate than we did. We backed a number of outstanding candidates. Unfortunately, we can't say that 80% of them won, but the 20% who did are really great. In all seriousness, this is an occasion to reflect on the values that bring us together as Americans who are Zionists, supporters of the U.S.-Israel relationship, strengthening it, and ensuring that we're not divided as we try to maintain a strong bipartisan front of support for maintaining that relationship. We've heard from members of Congress and in Haley's remarks about bipartisan pieces of legislation that needed to be moved forward, and that is the work of the moment, but we do have to look beyond this year into next year and recognize that there are challenges ahead. And in thinking about a structure of brief remarks to set the stage for a longer discussion, I decided I would try and be fair and balanced and point to a few things that it's imperative for the Republican Jews to do, and then maybe a few that I would call on the Jewish Democrats to reflect on as they look at the path forward. I'll start with the thoughts about what it's incumbent on us as Jewish Republicans to do to affirm a strong bipartisan U.S. support for Israel. One thing is to recognize that, especially among new members, there are the opportunities to make friends that we don't start out with. And one of the new members that I think Hallie alluded to is very high profile. It's Congresswoman-elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And back in May, when she first burst on the scene, she got a lot of attention for remarks criticizing Israel harshly for the measures that Israel had undertaken to defend itself from the attacks from Gaza, calling it a massacre, remarks that I know caused a lot of concern across the spectrum, but recognizing, I think, we need to avoid what conservative columnist Jonah Goldberg called Ocasio-Cortez derangement syndrome, recognize that this is a relatively young, new member of Congress, and we should have the door open, not only through working with her, but allowing her to reach her own conclusions and perhaps becoming a friend. We shouldn't preclude that possibility as much as we are concerned. As Jewish Republicans, we need to accept that our today adversary might be our friend tomorrow. We need to avoid painting with a broad brush, and there's nothing that helps reacquaint me with the strength of Democrat support for Israel than listening to leading Democratic members like Eliot Engel, Ted Deutsch, and others that I think we'll hear from today who are outstanding pro-Israel leaders. And when we do the political things we do as Jewish Republicans, it's incumbent on us to not paint with too broad a brush and slight those members who sometimes really distinguish themselves by standing up to forces within their own party and preventing more of a rupture in the pro-Israel consensus that we're here to uphold today. And finally, I'd say we should recognize that there are problems on our own side of the aisle. We have, as was alluded to, Senator Rand Paul holding up the bill to write the Memorandum of Understanding funding levels into law, and we need to say that that's wrong. This used to be more of a concern, I think. Earlier in the decade, Senator Paul was seen as perhaps a harbinger of things to come within the Republican Party. It hasn't really turned out that way, and for that we're thankful, but we do have to recognize that we have some work to do in our own ranks as well. Now, turning to the more, I suppose, pointed remarks, some general thoughts on what it's incumbent on Democrats to do. First and foremost, I would say that it's incumbent on Democrats to avoid denial. The Pew poll came out earlier this year, and it found that there was a drop-off in the level of Americans who say that they identify with, that is the level of Democratic Americans, who say they identify more with Israel than the Palestinians in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. That was troubling, and it was especially troubling because the Democrats who were most likely to say that they were neutral or supportive of the Palestinians were the more liberal ones. That is the strength of the Democratic Party in its activist base. It was troubling because the ones who were more likely to say that they were less supportive of Israel were the younger ones, the party's future. So recognizing, as I have already, and we all do, the outstanding leadership in Congress and the outstanding Democratic grassroots activists who work to support the U.S.-Israel relationship, it's important not to deny that there is this growing problem, that the Pew poll manifested itself, and that it has been reported on by outlets like the New York Times, the Jerusalem Post, and Tablet Magazine, not right-wing outlets, but a real concern that shouldn't be denied. Secondly, I'd say, with all the strong feelings about the Trump administration, Democrats ought to be on guard against the peril of excessively knee-jerk reactions to things that they may have previously agreed with. We saw this on the embassy issue, where there was a complete lack of Democratic leadership representation at the embassy opening last year. That was unfortunate. We see it in issues like UNRWA, where many Democrats in Congress and elsewhere have recognized the problems with that UN agency, but nevertheless criticized what President Trump did to try and change that status quo that had failed so abjectly. And we see it across a range of other issues. So that second caution to Democrats, please don't let your frustrations with the president take you away from strong pro-Israel positions you've taken in the past. And finally, let's be sure that we don't permit a dilution of what it means to be pro-Israel or to be Americans who support a strong U.S.-Israel alliance. There's often this formulation that comes from the left that says it's okay to criticize Israel and still be pro-Israel. Well, it is, but theoretically, and in fact, we see plenty of examples of how this can be done conscientiously and responsibly, but we also see that the just criticizing the Israeli government formulation can bring in a lot of more deeply troubling and even anti-Zionist, even anti-Semitic at the extremes kinds of attacks. So we need to keep that. We need to keep that that strong expectation, not to fine our standards down to accommodate a situation where there may be backsliding among some of our friends. So with those hopefully balanced cautions, I'll yield the mic and look forward to a great discussion with everybody.